Most people confuse rudeness with weakness of character. They see it as a flaw, a lack of control, something that exposes a person's inner chaos. But Machiavelli would laugh at that, because to him, what the world calls rude is often just power that refuses to explain itself. It's the language of someone who's past the need for approval, the sharp edge that cuts through manipulation, noise, and empty politeness, and that, if used with precision, becomes a weapon few can defend against. Think about how most people operate. They're addicted to being seen as nice. They spend their lives cushioning every word, apologizing for their existence, over-explaining every decision, terrified of being disliked. And yet, ironically, those are the same people who are disrespected, ignored, and used the most. Why? Because their politeness signals submission. It tells others, you come first, I come second. Machiavelli understood that every social interaction is a negotiation of power. And when you're too polite, you've already surrendered half your ground before the game even begins. Rudeness, when wielded correctly, isn't about being hostile or cruel. It's about reclaiming that lost ground. It's a form of social clarity. It removes the fog of niceties that weak people hide behind. When someone crosses your boundaries and you respond bluntly, don't do that again, you're not being rude. You're being real. You're setting a psychological frame that says, I don't fear your reaction. And that frame makes people take you seriously in a way that endless kindness never will. But here's where it becomes art. Machiavelli warned that raw aggression without strategy only breeds chaos. The truly powerful man uses rudeness like a scalpel, not a sword. He uses it to cut through illusions, to shock people into respect, to remind them that not every word deserves a smile. Imagine a general who never raises his voice, but whose silence after your failure chills you to the bone. That's power. Rudeness, when used right, is not noise, it's control. You've probably seen this dynamic play out. The boss who doesn't sugarcoat anything. The professor who doesn't bother to explain why your excuse doesn't matter. The man or woman who simply says no and walks away. They don't argue. They don't justify. They don't explain. That slight coldness triggers something ancient in human psychology. Fear mixed with respect. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself, people start filling the silence with their own assumptions. They start thinking, maybe this person knows something I don't. That's how you turn what others call rudeness into quiet dominance. But of course, this isn't about pretending to be tough. If you fake it, people will feel it. True Machiavellian presence comes from internal permission. To not care if others misunderstand you. To not chase clarity where it's not owed. To not apologize for decisions that protect your peace. It's not about being cold-hearted. It's about being selectively warm. People confuse empathy with accessibility, but Machiavelli would say, never make your warmth a public resource. Reserve it for the few who've earned it. For everyone else, a little edge, a little indifference is exactly what keeps you untouchable. Let's take an example. You're at work. Someone tries to dump their responsibilities on you under the disguise of teamwork. The polite thing to do is smile, maybe take it on to avoid conflict. But the Machiavellian move? Look them in the eye and say, that's not my problem. Yes, it's rude. Yes, it might make them uncomfortable. But that's the point. That discomfort resets the dynamic. It teaches them that you're not the easy one anymore. And after the shock wears off, they'll start respecting your boundaries instead of testing them. Because the human mind is wired to respect what it fears losing. Your approval, your time, your silence. What most don't realize is that rudeness has levels. The beginner uses it defensively, to protect themselves. The master uses it offensively, to shape how others behave around them. He doesn't wait for disrespect. He frames the interaction from the first word. He's short, clear, and sometimes intentionally underreactive. Why? Because overreaction shows weakness. The calm form of rudeness, the type that doesn't try to win an argument but simply dismisses it, is far more intimidating. There's something disarming about a person who refuses to play the emotional game. When others push for attention, debate, validation, or gossip, and you respond with flat indifference, it burns them. Machiavelli knew this. Attention is currency. Whoever controls where it flows controls the room. And rudeness is a way of seizing that control, of signaling, I don't need your energy. That subtle withdrawal forces people to chase yours. You might have noticed this in people you once admired. The artist who never replies. The leader who cancels meetings last minute and doesn't apologize. The person who's always slightly unpredictable, slightly unreachable. Their absence becomes magnetic, because while everyone else tries to please, they disrupt the social order. That disruption is rude but powerful. It's proof that they don't need to beg for belonging. And when you don't need to belong, you suddenly become the center everyone orbits around. But let's be clear, there's a dark side. Use rudeness too often and you'll isolate yourself. People will avoid you, not respect you. The key lies in intention. Machiavelli taught that every display of behavior must serve power or protection. If your bluntness doesn't do either, it's wasteful arrogance. You don't insult for sport. You don't humiliate the weak just to feel strong. That's not strategy, that's insecurity. The true master of rudeness uses it rarely, surgically, and only when silence or softness would cause loss. You can test this today. The next time someone tries to control your narrative, cut the sugarcoating. Instead of "I'm sorry but I can't," say "I can't." Instead of "I totally understand but," just say "that doesn't work for me." Remove the unnecessary cushions. Notice how it shifts the energy. They'll pause, blink, maybe get defensive, maybe go quiet. That silence is your confirmation. It worked. You just reminded them that you're not one of the submissive many, that your approval is not automatic. Machiavelli would call this strategic friction. The tension you create by not being endlessly agreeable becomes your power field. It keeps others calculating around you. Because when people never know how soft or sharp you'll be, they approach you with caution. And caution is a form of respect. Even in modern life, this truth hasn't changed. The friend who never answers immediately, the entrepreneur who doesn't do discounts, the man who doesn't explain his no, they all use micro-rudeness to maintain leverage. In every kingdom, social or digital, the one who's least desperate wins. That's why the art of calculated rudeness is not about rebellion, it's about hierarchy. It teaches others that access to you has a cost. You might not realize it yet, but every time you say yes when you mean no, you're training people to treat your time as worthless. Every time you laugh off an insult to keep the peace, you lose a bit of presence. The world reads your tolerance like a book. It learns exactly how far it can go. But when you start interrupting that pattern with sharpness, with small, controlled rudeness, you rewrite how the world reads you. And suddenly, people start measuring their words around you. They become careful, even curious. They start wondering, what else is this person capable of? That's when rudeness stops being social noise and becomes silent command. Because behind every powerful presence is the courage to not care who misunderstands you, the ability to risk discomfort for clarity, and the mastery of knowing when to let silence speak for you. It's not that the world needs more rude people. It needs more people who understand why kindness alone isn't enough. Machiavelli would say, if you wish to be feared and loved, start by removing your need to be liked. Because when you stop chasing approval, even your quietest no will echo louder than their screams for attention. Rudeness, used right, is not the absence of manners. It's the presence of self-respect. And that is something no amount of politeness can ever replace. Rudeness reveals who's actually free. Because most people are prisoners of politeness. They spend their days managing impressions, terrified of saying the wrong thing, of being misjudged, of breaking the invisible rules that keep everyone in line. But Machiavelli saw those rules for what they were, tools of control. The polite man bends. The rude man chooses when to bend. And that single difference separates the ones who follow from the ones who lead. Look around. Every person who's ever commanded presence has a little streak of rudeness in them. It's not arrogance, it's self-trust. They're not performing politeness to gain favor. They already know where they stand. And when you know where you stand, you don't flinch when others get uncomfortable. You don't rush to smooth over silence. You let it sit. Because silence itself can be ruder than words. And that's what makes it powerful. It makes people project their guilt, their anxiety, their need for approval, all while you say nothing. Machiavelli would call this a victory without conflict. You didn't argue, you didn't prove. You simply withheld softness, and they folded. That's what real power feels like. The ability to unsettle people just by being unmoved. Think of how a single blunt response, no, that's not my concern, you'll have to fix that yourself, can shatter someone's entire manipulation. It interrupts their expectation of your compliance. And once you break that expectation, their power over you dissolves. This is where subtlety comes in. The genius of Machiavellian rudeness isn't in how loud it is, it's in how rare. A person who's rude all the time loses the effect. It becomes noise. But a person who's usually calm and measured, When they suddenly withdraw warmth or deliver a short, sharp response, it lands like thunder. Because people have gotten used to comfort. They expect emotional cushioning. And when you take that away, it feels like punishment. This is the psychology behind control. People crave predictability. They want to know exactly how you'll respond so they can prepare. When your demeanor is polite and constant, they can map you easily. But when you're composed yet occasionally rude, impossible to predict, you create mystery. And mystery equals leverage. Let's say you're negotiating. You've been patient, respectful, composed. But at one point, instead of nodding along, you interrupt, calmly but directly. You're wasting my time. The words hang in the air. That one moment of coldness resets the balance. You're no longer reacting, you're commanding. They'll scramble to recover, suddenly eager to please. And you? You just reclaimed the psychological high ground without raising your voice. That's why Machiavelli never saw rudeness as emotional. It was tactical. He understood that humans read hierarchy through emotion. If someone can make you feel guilty, small, or afraid of disapproval, they control you. But when you demonstrate that you're not affected by those levers, the dynamic flips. You become the one others now try not to offend. That's the paradox. Strategic rudeness doesn't push people away. It pulls them closer through fear of loss. When they realize your attention is conditional, your respect is scarce, they start working for it. And that's what makes it a superpower. It trains people around you to value your words, your time, your approval. Of course, there's a difference between commanding respect and chasing dominance. Machiavelli never advocated for cruelty for its own sake. The goal isn't to be feared, it's to be unshakable. The truly feared person doesn't have to shout, threaten, or prove anything. Their energy does the talking. They've built a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, and the world adjusts accordingly. That's how reputations form, not through constant power displays, but through consistent boundaries. Every time you say what others are too afraid to say, every time you walk away when others would beg, every time you refuse to smile through disrespect, you build that reputation brick by brick. Eventually, your silence becomes louder than their opinions. And here's the funny thing. Once people realize that you can be rude, they stop testing you. You won't even have to use it anymore. The mere possibility becomes enough. It's like a weapon you rarely draw, but everyone knows you own. But what about kindness? Isn't that more powerful? Only when it's chosen, not automatic. Kindness without strength is manipulation bait. People sense it. They see it as something they can drain. But kindness backed by the willingness to be rude, that's terrifying. Because it means your empathy is not for sale. It's a choice. Machiavelli would argue that mercy only matters when cruelty is an option. In the same way, politeness only holds value when rudeness is within reach. You'll notice that the most charismatic people, the ones who walk into a room and everyone feels their gravity, don't talk too much. They don't overgreet. They don't try to make everyone comfortable. Their presence alone creates tension. And tension, in psychology, equals attention. The rude edge, the quiet refusal to conform, is what forces people to tune in. Even socially, rudeness can be used as a mirror. When you act slightly indifferent towards someone who expects validation, you expose their hunger for it. You see who's performing confidence versus who actually has it. A truly confident person doesn't crumble when you're distant. They remain grounded. But the insecure one will chase harder. Rudeness, in this way, becomes a tool of discernment. And the same goes for influence. When you're always polite, people assume they can read you. But when you're unpredictable, they become cautious, even curious. They start trying to understand you, to earn your softness. They watch what triggers your indifference and what earns your attention. Congratulations, you've just inverted the power structure. They're analyzing you now, not the other way around. But remember, this only works if your rudeness has roots. If it's coming from emptiness or ego, it shows. The real thing comes from principle, from an internal code that values clarity over comfort. You're not rude to prove you're superior. You're rude because you won't lie for approval. You won't soften truth to make weak people feel strong. And you won't dilute your energy just to be liked. That's what gives your words their weight. They carry the tension of someone who doesn't need to be understood. You can tell who's mastered this by how they move. They're composed, unhurried, slightly detached, and yet deeply aware. They're not loud, but if they're crossed, their silence feels colder than an insult. Because real power doesn't shout, it withdraws warmth. That's Machiavelli's secret. The most strategic cruelty is absence. If you start practicing this, you'll notice how quickly people adjust. They'll start treating your time as sacred. They'll choose their words more carefully. They'll offer more respect without realizing why. That's what rudeness does. It creates a hierarchy of energy. People stop assuming equality and start sensing difference. The truth is, most of society runs on polite lies. Rudeness, in its truest form, is simply truth without disguise. When you say what others only think, you become dangerous. Because honesty in a world addicted to comfort is the ultimate rebellion. And rebellion, Machiavelli knew, is the seed of authority. But it all begins with one small decision: to stop cushioning yourself for others, to let your presence carry a bit of discomfort, to let your no sound final. That's not cruelty, that's liberation. Because when you stop bending, people finally see where you stand, and that clarity, more than any charm or flattery, is what makes the world quietly bow. Most people think power comes from persuasion, from being liked, from getting people to agree with you. But Machiavelli understood something far more primal. Real power often comes from the ability to create discomfort and remain unmoved by it. That's why rudeness, when used right, doesn't repel people. It commands them. Because humans, at their core, respect what they can't control. Think about the people you found unforgettable in your life. Chances are it wasn't the overly polite coworker who agreed with everything you said. It was the one who had no problem saying no when everyone else hesitated. The one who didn't need to fill the silence. The one who seemed immune to embarrassment or guilt. That's what draws people in. It's the mystery of emotional independence. You can't manipulate someone who's not afraid to be rude. Rudeness sends a signal. Your approval isn't my oxygen. That's why it's magnetic. People can sense when you're not performing. You see, the modern world rewards performance, fake smiles, fake empathy, fake modesty. It celebrates politeness as virtue, but what it's really doing is creating control. It makes people easier to manage. When you're too polite, you self-censor before they ever have to silence you. And Machiavelli would call that the first stage of losing power, when your voice bends before it's even challenged. But when you break that conditioning, when you stop apologizing for taking up space, your energy shifts. The same words you've always said start landing differently. People pause. They measure their tone. They think twice before interrupting. Not because you're rude, but because they feel your self-respect. That's the paradox most never grasp. You don't earn respect by being agreeable. You earn it by being immovable. Every time you politely accept something that violates your boundaries, you're teaching others that your comfort is negotiable. But when you respond with rudeness, not cruelty, just blunt truth, you send the opposite message. My peace is not up for debate. And that's when people start seeing you differently. This is why Machiavellian leaders were never obsessed with popularity. They understood that fear and respect are born from the same seed, the realization that someone's world doesn't revolve around you. When people can't predict how far they can push, they stop pushing. When they can't guilt you, they stop trying. When they can't charm you, they start admiring you. Because what they truly crave is strength they can't buy. The beauty of strategic rudeness is that it's not reactive, it's intentional. You don't use it because you lost control. You use it to establish control. There's a huge difference between emotional rudeness and deliberate rudeness. Emotional rudeness is chaos. It's born from insecurity, ego, or exhaustion. Deliberate rudeness is clarity. It's the refusal to play small. It's when you look someone in the eye and say, "I don't care if this makes you uncomfortable, I'm still saying it." That kind of confidence doesn't need volume. In fact, it often whispers. Because true strength doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from mastering your reactions. A calm, slightly rude tone can shatter someone's entire illusion of superiority faster than a screaming match ever could. That's what Machiavelli meant by mastering appearances. It's not about being cruel, it's about understanding that perception shapes reality. And sometimes, being perceived as too blunt or cold is exactly what keeps parasites away. Here's where most people fail. They try to be rude after years of being soft, and it comes out forced, bitter, defensive. That's not power. That's pain wearing armor. True rudeness, the kind that commands respect, grows from inner peace. It's the product of knowing you don't owe everyone softness. You've earned the right to conserve your warmth for what matters. You can feel it in a simple no. There's a different weight when someone says no because they're scared versus when they say it because they're free. The first one trembles. The second one ends the conversation. The second one has power. That's what makes rudeness so misunderstood. It's not about conflict, it's about conclusion. It's about ending the endless loops of over-explaining, over-justifying, over-caring. It's the point where your boundaries stop being a discussion and start being reality. Machiavelli would call this the power of finality. The strong make decisions and move on. The weak linger in explanation. Every time you end a conversation without trying to convince someone, you reclaim time, energy, and mental space. And you send a message that your decisions don't need external validation. That's how power compounds. It's not built in a single moment, but through hundreds of quiet refusals to bend. Try watching how people react the next time you don't play the politeness game. They'll squirm, they'll test you, they'll call you cold, arrogant, distant because you're breaking their illusion of control. But once they realize you won't fold, they'll recalibrate. They'll adjust to your level, or they'll disappear. Either way, you win. Because here's the truth. Being rude is only a problem if you need everyone to like you. Once you let go of that need, rudeness becomes freedom. It becomes honesty. It becomes armor. It's what allows you to say no to manipulation, to stop apologizing for breathing too loudly, to stop shrinking just to fit into someone's fragile comfort zone. This is the kind of attitude that creates unshakable presence. You walk into a room and people sense it, not because you're loud, not because you're dressed a certain way, but because your energy says, I'm not here to please, I'm here to exist. That's Machiavellian power, the art of being ungovernable without saying a word. It's why kings could command armies with a single glance, why a leader's silence could silence a crowd. They weren't loved because they were polite. They were followed because they were unbothered. They radiated a kind of certainty that politeness could never achieve. And that certainty, the courage to be disliked, was their superpower. You don't need to be cruel to have that. You just need to stop over-explaining, stop cushioning truth, stop sugarcoating your boundaries. You need to get comfortable with people misreading you. Let them. The ones who get it will respect you more. The ones who don't were never meant to have your softness anyway. In a world that rewards submission disguised as politeness, rudeness is rebellion. It's the act of reclaiming your dignity from the hands of people who mistake meekness for virtue. And once you taste that freedom, when you realize that you can be direct, cold, and still deeply human, you'll never want to go back. Because when you stop begging to be liked, the world stops trying to tame you. And that's when your presence becomes something people don't just notice, they obey.